Immediately after the Munich Security Conference, European diplomacy chief Kaja Kallas called an emergency meeting of EU foreign ministers.
Europe stands strongly united in supporting Ukraine and strengthening our own defence. We will soon come up with new initiatives to take this forward. Kaja Kallas, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, on X social network.
The subject of the emergency meeting has not been publicly announced. Analysts believe that this is related to the speech at the Munich Security Conference by the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, who actually outlined the new format for restrictions between Washington and Brussels. Vance called the main threat to Europe's security not Russia or China, but the elite shift away from democratic values.
But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
European experts and journalists called the speech of the U.S. Vice President controversial, resonant, and even provocative.
He said that democracy in Europe is under threat, and he tried, in my opinion, to redefine the principles of democracy, but in a way that is definitely not in line with the European value consensus. So, what we saw was a demonstration by a representative of the US government, which is a right-wing populist government that is itself undermining democracy at home and trying to convey that this is happening in Europe as well.
Vance's speech was also commented on by European politicians.
After Vice President Vance's speech on Friday, we must fear that our common value base is no longer so common. I am very grateful to all those European politicians who have spoken out and reaffirmed the values and principles they defend. No one has done it better than President Zelenskyy.
Another statement by the U.S. President's team has drawn sharp criticism from European leaders. The U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Kit Kellogg, said that he did not see European representatives as participants in the negotiations on ending Russia's war against Ukraine. Without European participation, there can be no lasting peace in Ukraine. Germany's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock, is convinced.
Our answer to other people's "my country first" is Europe is one. And that's what we are showing here on the panel. This is what we have shown over the last couple of days, and we have made it clear. There will be no peace in Europe if it is not a European peace.
Europe should be united and strong. It is possible to build strong relations with the United States of America on such a foundation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy believes.
America needs to see where Europe is heading, and this direction of European policy shouldn't just be promising, it should make America want to stand with a strong Europe. This is absolutely possible, I'm sure of it, and we must shape that course. Europe must decide its own future.
The partners should strengthen Ukraine's negotiation positions, the Finnish president has said. Alexander Stubb called for increased military aid to Ukraine and for maximum pressure on Russia.
The first phase is preliminary negotiations, and this is the moment when Europe needs to rearm Ukraine and put maximum pressure on Russia. This means sanctions and using frozen assets so that Ukraine starts these negotiations from a position of strength.
To discuss challenges to European security, French President Emmanuel Macron has invited European leaders to an emergency summit in Paris. The information was confirmed by Minister for Foreign Affairs of France, Jean-Noël Barrot. He did not specify which leaders would take part in the meeting. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavec, Natalia Husak, Volodymyr Stenhelov, UATV News.
Security in Europe and support for Ukraine are the key issues on the agenda for U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's tour of European countries. He has already visited the headquarters of the U.S. European and Africa Commands in Germany. He is also set to participate in a meeting of NATO defense ministers and a session of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format.
According to Pentagon officials, Hegseth is expected to push for U.S. allies in Europe to increase their defense spending and take a more active role in addressing the challenges facing Europe. He is also likely to reiterate President Donald Trump's call for a diplomatic resolution to the war between Russia and Ukraine. From the Voice of America publication.
President Trump has strongly criticized European countries for chronically underfunding their security. He has warned that the US could leave NATO if alliance members fail to meet the mandatory contribution of 2% of GDP. Trump's administration also holds the position that Europe should take greater responsibility for ending the war in Ukraine and maintaining peace afterward. We will have our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, our Vice President in Europe this week, talking through the details of how to end this war. The underlying principle here is that Europeans have to own this conflict going forward. President Trump is going to end it, and in terms of security guarantees, it is squarely going to be with the Europeans. Meanwhile, Washington has paused the development of its plan for ending the war in Ukraine to consult with European nations and give them a seat at the negotiating table. The Telegraph, citing sources, reports that U.S. Special Envoy for Russia and Ukraine, Kate Kellogg, will present fragments of Trump's plan at the Munich Security Conference. According to Reuters, Kellogg will also use the event to encourage European nations to increase their purchases of American weaponry.
It is one of several ideas the administration is discussing to potentially continue U.S. weapons shipments to Kyiv without expending significant U.S. capital. The Trump White House would likely face significant pushback from some Republicans if it moves forward with asking for additional funding from Congress. Administration officials view an arms purchase deal with Europe as a potential workaround, allowing Washington to support Kyiv without spending U.S. taxpayer dollars. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said last month that Europe would pay for U.S. arms for Ukraine. From the Reuters publication.
Earlier, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte stated that European countries are prepared to purchase more American weapons and supply them to Ukraine. Additionally, the EU has recently been reassessing its defense strategy. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that Brussels will unveil a new policy document, the White Paper of the Future of European Defense, in mid-March.
That we need an EU-wide surge in defense. Modern warfare requires scale, technology, and coordination, too big for any one nation to handle alone, and this is where European cooperation delivers. We will need funding, both public and private. We discussed that in the European Council at the beginning of the week. We will need more cooperation for better interoperability and lower costs, simpler legislation, more innovation, and more return on investment as the world is changing fast. Our long-time ally, the United States, has set a new agenda. Europe is prepared for a robust but constructive dialogue with the United States.
According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, ensuring Ukraine's security in the post-war period will require support from both Europe and the US. In an interview with The Guardian, he cited the US-supplied Patriot air defense systems as a crucial element in protecting Ukraine from all types of missile threats. Zelenskyy also expressed support for French President Emmanuel Macron's initiative to deploy a European military contingent to Ukraine after the end of hostilities, provided the force reaches a strength of 100,000 to 150,000 troops. Reported by Serhiy Kulias, Andriy Dmytrenko, UATV News.